In today's video, I'm going to show you exactly how I do my listening immersion and how I use a very cool, nifty little app that a lot of people don't really know about. I've mentioned about it on my website before, but it's really cool. It has some really nice features that you can use to speed up and get more immersion in the same amount of time that you would normally basically use for immersing. So let's get right into it. So what is this app, you might ask? Well, it's an app called Podcast Addict. It's really, really cool. It's just an ordinary podcast app on the outside anyway. But one of the things that I was struggling with when trying to find something to use for listening to audio in Japanese is that, if you use an ordinary music player app, that, just for generic music and stuff, most of the time they don't save where you are in the location of the file. And of course, when you're immersing, especially when you're actively immersing, this is something that is a must-have. You need to be able to go back to where you paused or where you closed the app earlier. So obviously, having an app that can save where you just last left off is really useful. And it was surprisingly annoying finding an app that could do this. And in the end, I figured, I'll just use the podcast app that I've always used. I found out that you can just import any music files or audio files of whatever into this app and add it as a separate podcast, which I'm going to show you how to do this on the screen as we're talking. It's very simple, very easy to do. You can do that and then have all your listening in this one sort of separate folder. Something that's really cool about it is once you've finished listening to a file, it marks it as green with an arrow to say that you've listened to it. So it's incredibly useful in that regards. But obviously any other app that you can find that can do a similar thing is obviously very useful as well. I also use just an app called Audiobooks, I think anyway. Again, I'll leave it on the screen. And I use that for passive listening as a separate app just to sort of not have to worry about my progress at all. If I'm like listening, say at work or whatever, and I'm not properly focused on the content at hand, then I'll use that for passive listening as opposed to active listening. Where does Podcast Addict really come into play for language learners? Well, it's mainly really for the intermediate and advanced learners out there, but it has two major things that I use it for all the time that are incredibly useful for listening practice. And the main reason for these two things is to, one, shorten the amount of time that I'm spending listening to a certain thing, and secondly, to try and get used to more fast-speaking Japanese. So I'll go with the most obvious answer, the most obvious thing that it does, which, again, a lot of other apps will do this. It's mainly the last thing that it does, which is really cool that a lot of apps don't do, but still, I'm going to mention this anyway because it's something that I do every day, and I think it's really useful for advanced learners, and that is speeding up the playtime. Now, of course, this can be used for beginners as well to speed down the playtime, to slow down the playtime so that you can get used to normal spoken Japanese at a slower rate. But for more advanced learners, getting used to really fast speech and someone who's speaking really, really quickly can be very beneficial. Especially, if you're in a conversation with a bunch of different people and they're all trying to butt in and try and speak, then it's very important that you can catch everything that's being said. So something that I will do is if I'm listening to an audiobook or if I'm listening to a podcast, then I will whack it up to 2 times speed. Or if the person's already speaking quite fast, maybe I'll put it to 1.5 times speed. And this trains my brain to get used to high-speaking, very fastly spoken Japanese very quickly. And it is something that I would recommend doing a little bit here and there. I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing this for audio immersion all day. And I wouldn't necessarily recommend any beginners doing this straight away. I would wait until you are able to understand most of the Japanese language before you start doing this. But it's incredibly powerful, and it's something that I do on a daily basis. So what is this last feature of Podcast Addict that makes it super useful for language learners? Well, this is something that I've mentioned on my blog a few years ago, and since then, a couple of people have taken it upon themselves to make listening audio that they use on a daily basis and actually compress it. Essentially, what the feature is it's a feature that removes any blank space from audio files. So if you're listening to a podcast or an audiobook or a YouTube video that you've converted to an MP3 and there's some dead space and there's like 30 seconds of the beginning of the video where no one speaks or says anything, there's no audio or something like that, then Podcast Addict can, if you turn on this feature, can just delete that and remove it from the file. So what you'll find is if you combine this with the 2 times speed or 1.5 times speed, you'll just get this massive bombardment of Japanese speech. And it's kind of crazy because if you can get used to this kind of speaking and you can get used to this massive fast-paced speech, your listening ability is going to be insane. You're not going to struggle listening to normal daily conversation in Japanese. So again, for the advanced learners, definitely, not necessarily for the beginners. But certainly if you're listening to files where, or you're listening to someone who's a very slow speaker and they have lots of gaps in their speech, and, it drags on a bit, and you think, oh, maybe I could, make this a bit more efficient, then certainly whack it into Podcast Addict, turn on the feature that gets rid of the blank spaces, and you'll find that you'll be getting a much more listening immersion in 1 hour than you would be normally. Personally, I find doing this, if I take a 1 hour audiobook and I was to put it at 1.5 times speed, and also activate the function that removes all the blank spaces and all the dead spaces within the podcast or within the audiobook, I can listen to that 1 hour audiobook within 30 minutes. It's that powerful. It's kind of crazy, really. And so it really does condense down all the audio listening and all the listening that you can do to allow you to get way much more listening in 1 hour or however many hours that you're doing your listening for. So if you're someone who wants to get as much in as you possibly can, definitely check out Podcast Addict and have a look at it. I'm not affiliated with them. I'm not sponsored by them. It's just a really good app that I've been using for years. So I go back through the video, look at how to actually activate the function to remove all the gaps. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you found it useful. If you did, leave a like and a comment down below. Don't forget to check out the Patreon if you are interested in supporting the channel. I have tons of other content over on Patreon talking about language learning, and also I have the sentence bank and all the sentence decks from Substrate RS. If you're interested in learning Japanese with Anki and using sentence flashcards, then definitely check that out. Thank you very much to all the people supporting me on Patreon, especially Harry and everybody else over on there. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much. And also, if you're watching this far ahead, check out my second channel. I've got a podcast over there that you might like. You might want to submit your questions to me to answer on the podcast, so go check that out. And subscribe, like, comment, all that good stuff. Thank you very much for watching. See you in the next video. Bye.